What's the scariest thing you've ever seen while driving on the highway? For some reason, I was driving through middle of nowhere West Texas / New Mexico late at night. I just moved to that region of the country. I'm driving along while my husband is asleep in the passenger seat when this giant thing comes crawling out into the road in front of me and scares the crap out of me. I scream, "What is that thing?" a split second before I slammed into it. My husband gives me this perplexed look and is like, "Haven't you ever seen a tumbleweed before?" No, Brian, I have not seen a tumbleweed before. One early morning, about 6 a.m., I was driving with a friend on the highway in the twists and turns of a mountain valley. We were just having a casual chat in the car. Nobody was on the highway at that time of day, and even less on this part of the highway. I took a quick peek in the rearview mirror and saw a car coming, not fast, but fast. I tell my friend to watch out for the incoming car because I thought they were coming way too fast and wasn't changing lane to pass us. At the very last moment, my friend kind of swerved a little toward the right of the lane and the car behind us hard swerved towards the ditch. The car disappeared in the deep ditch and reappeared, jumping about 4 to 5 feet in the air toward the highway at about 100 kilometers per hour with the momentum, and back onto the highway it was. Like it was nothing. The drivers speed up and we lose him ahead of us, and he was going about 140 kilometers per hour after the near-death accident. We were absolutely shocked and couldn't say a word for like 2 to 3 minutes. We assumed the driver fell asleep and at the last second saw he was going to ram us and swerved towards the ditch. Shock probably made him speed up after the impact. It was crazy surreal because there was nobody else for miles around even after that. I traveled for about 5 hours to attend a family event. Lots of people I hadn't seen for 20 plus years. I had my 5-year-old son with me, but my husband had to stay home because of work. Crazy drunk / stoned hippie aunt came up and said, "I see an owl on your shoulder protecting you." Okay, love. See you again in another 20 years. Lay off the bong. Driving home, it's about 2 a.m., middle of nowhere, still probably 2 hours from home. Kids asleep in the back, and I start to have a little danger naps. So I pull over at a rest stop thinking I'll jump out and have a quick cigarette and get back to it. I get out of the car and I'm just standing there. A meter from my door is a big white barn owl. What the F? Have my smoke while this thing just stares at me, not even blinking. Amazing. Get back in the car and decide to have a quick sleep before I start driving again. Okay, better safe than sorry. Maybe the owl is trying to tell me something. Maybe it's 2 a.m. and I'm delirious. About half an hour later, I wake up to this terrible banging, scratching noise. I open my eyes and this owl is on the bonnet of my car right in front of me and is jumping up and down, flapping its wings and banging into the bonnet and the windscreen. Okay, what the F, mate? I go to get out of the car and shoo it away, and when I look out my window, there's a man right there staring at me through the window, smoking a cigarette. I still don't understand how it happened so quickly, but I just locked the doors, started the car, and started to back out of my parking spot. The man jumped at the car, trying to open the door and punching at the window. I just drove out of there as fast as I could and sped down the highway until the adrenaline wore off. Then I pulled up and had a bit of a cry and realized I could call the police. Nothing ever came of it. They never found the man, and I think they thought I was a bit insane anyway. As if there was really a strange man in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night. I was probably just dreaming, overtired, imagining things. I'll be forever grateful to that big white barn owl, though. I certainly hope the next day you called that aunt of yours and thanked her for whatever she did. Maybe next time you ask for a little of what she was smoking, because that woman knows the power of the puff. One night as I was driving back home from work, it was about 1 a.m. There was a semi in front of me. The day was clear, but all of a sudden a fog rolled in, which was completely normal for the area, but something seemed off about it. As I'm passing through the fog, instead of water droplets, blood droplets were coming onto my car. I had no idea what happened. Then fur and guts started raining onto my car. Apparently, the semi in front of me hit a deer, and I got caught in the aftermath of it. I drove home with bits and pieces of deer all over my car. My boyfriend had a 20-year-old car with a mismatched door, and he lived on the top of a long, winding mountain road. One day, we were coming down the mountain when we saw the same car coming towards us. It was pouring rain, so we weren't able to make out any details of the driver or passenger, but it was the exact same car with the same mismatched door. We turned around as soon as we could and raced back up the mountain to try to catch up with them, but we weren't able to. This was 15 years ago when we both think it was us coming back up the mountain in some sort of weird alternate universe / timeline. Not sure what to call it. In rural East Texas, I was driving through some very thick fog on a back road. Like so thick, I could only go about 20 miles per hour since I could barely see the road in front of me. An important part of this story is that I was driving an old pickup truck without a lift. After creeping forward down the road for a good while and being scared out of my mind, I got the feeling that I could see the outline of something up ahead and I should slow down more and try to move to the side of the road. As I got closer, I could tell that the outline I saw was a dead hog, common for East Texas, but it was one of the biggest hogs I've seen, easily 400 pounds, less common, and then it started to move. It lurched to the side of the road a few times like it was being dragged by something. I thought, wow, that's a strong person. Should I help them move it so no one gets in a wreck? But before I stopped my truck completely and got out, the thing that was moving this 400-pound hog stood up. And I found myself eye level with the largest dog I've ever seen in my life. This dog stood looking me directly in the eyes while I sat in the driver's seat of an old Chevy truck. I've honestly never seen anything this big before and wasn't sure if this was a farm dog or a werewolf. Not only was it shockingly tall, it had the mass and strength to drag a behemoth by itself. It had shaggy white fur, so it reminded me of a Pyrenees, but it was easily 1.5 times the height. It took us probably 15 seconds of shock on both parts of staring before I said, F this crap, and rocketed out of there. After I got home, going 50 now, I thought about, damn, not only was that a monster, it was smart enough to move the hog off the road before eating it. I'm convinced to this day it was some East Texas old god. Not exactly on a highway, but a story I rarely share because of how much it freaked me out. We were driving down a road we normally drive down on our way home. We lived sort of in the country, so we pull off the main highway and onto the side road, driving down next to a canal heading into a cornfield. Standing next to a stop sign is a man-like figure, thin and bony, and appeared to be about 7 feet tall, higher than the stop sign, with bandages all over his face and arm and pale skin. This is exactly how I remember it. We had our window open and immediately rolled them up. We shot past the stop sign without coming to a stop and essentially sped all the way home. I'm not really a paranormal believer or anything like that, but Jesus HF, was it creepy as hell. We didn't sleep much that night. Maybe I'm just awful, but this makes me want to create tall, lanky scarecrow things and put them up in the middle of the night around the city. Really give some people the scares of their life. Certainly no way that could come back to bite me in the butt. I used to drive through the mountains routinely in Japan to get to the jiu-jitsu gym. It was about an hour trip back and forth. I'd go up to the mountains and then down and come out in the valley on the other side. I'd usually be driving back home around 11 p.m. because of how late our class went. Up in the mountains, that means it's pitch black and you're on a bunch of winding roads completely isolated from the rest of the world. So I'm driving along and I come around a turn. My headlights hit what I can only describe as the actual face of the devil, hiding back in the trees a few feet. 2 horns, glowing eyes, a light but unkempt beard. If you picture Satan, it was an exact facsimile. Just staring at me, unmoving, unflinching, uncaring. It just looked directly at me, staring into my eyes. Headlights caught it for only a second or two, but I instantly broke out into a sweat and my heart was beating out of my chest. It felt like 20 seconds. The thing is, I'm a staunch atheist. I'm about as strong an atheist as one can get, but that scared the hell out of me. My adrenaline was pumping for about 10 minutes, so what did I see? It was a Japanese Zero. Google it. They look very much like described. And when you catch one back in the woods a little to hide its body and catch it with your headlights, I kid you not, it looks exactly like a devil. I'm looking at pictures of these things, and I guess the horns are devilish, otherwise these things are adorable. But who am I to question the late-night mountain jiu-jitsu student whose story definitely sounds legit? I was sitting in a coach going down a long highway in a country I was on holiday in when I was 11. It was in the middle of the night, and the road was only lit by the vehicle's headlights or a passing car and the occasional lamppost, there barely any. The driver speeding pretty hard and the lights were bright, but right as we passed a little gap in the clearing, I was able to spot some uncanny valley-looking skinny crap that was hairless. Except for its head and neck, but it was on all fours looking at the bus while its eyes were lit up. It just stood there and kept on watching. Crap had me effing spooked to this day, and I get nervous when looking around a highway. At night or anywhere at night. I mean, geez, this thing looked like it came straight out of a horror flick, and I could tell it was staring. Was the worst part of that 4-second ordeal. I'm driving home one night. It's probably around 11 p.m. and really somewhat foggy out. Now, my car lights aren't the greatest, but she's my baby and I deal with her eccentricities. Another of which is that the radio was bugging out, so I'm driving home in silence and it's dark out. I've got about 35-minute drive, and I've been driving about 25 of those 35 minutes, and I'm absolutely exhausted. Now, to give some perspective to how this goes, you need to know a few things about me. First, when it comes to ghosts or the supernatural, I just don't believe in it, and never really have. I don't get easily creeped out or scared from horror movies or long rides in the dark or anything like that. I'm of the mindset that it just has to have a basis in reality to be truly scary or to get under my skin and bother me. Second, even though this is the case, I'm a huge horror movie fan, especially of Japanese horror movies and even their remakes like The Grudge or The Ring. They just have a way of sticking with me, and I quite like that. So as I'm driving home, as I say, I've only got about 10 minutes of the drive to go, and the fog increases dramatically, to the point I almost can't see the road even with my high beams on. But I know the road I'm on, I've driven through it probably hundreds of times before, and I'm just taking my time, so should any deer or anything dart across my path, I can stop without hitting them. This road and the surrounding area oftentimes do have deer crossing them, so I know to be on the lookout for them. However, as soon as this thought goes through my head about being cautious of deer, I get this eerie feeling, almost like deja vu, like I've had this thought before and driven this road before, and it had been this foggy before, and immediately there was a few feet of clarity. That is, no fog at all in my forward vision for a few feet, but there was a fog creeping across the road itself. I could see straight forward and I slammed on my brakes in the middle of the turn. There was a very skinny little girl standing in the middle of the road, maybe 5'5", completely motionless with long black dripping hair in front of her. And as the rest of the fog dissipated, I realized what I was looking at was a flag, half-staff, next to a mailbox in the turn of the end of the road I was driving on. My mind had created something that I never believed in, and for that brief second my heart stopped and the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Truly creepy stuff. That was a lot of explanation and build-up, all to lead to, I thought a mailbox in the fog was a creepy girl. I feel like I was on one of those recipe sites reading about the summer you spent in Tuscany and how that made you appreciate the cheese in this recipe, and it turns out the recipe was for like a pizza bagel. Actually, that sounds pretty good right now. Also, how is 5'5" a little girl? That's literally 1 inch above the average height of an adult woman. I live in a rural part of the UK. I was temping just after uni at a remote castle in the middle of effing nowhere. It was around 2 a.m. driving home across a moor, and I go over a hill and I come across a herd of ponies just chilling in the road. Almost had a heart attack. Successfully emergency stopped. Another time I was driving home again at night. It's peeing down with rain, so driving slow on another rural road. The road ahead seemed to be moving. I slow down to a stop and realize my route ahead is covered with frogs? F's sake. So, with my headbeams on, I stopped, get out, and thought the best thing to do was to chuck all these frogs over the hedge. Someone came in the other direction and stopped and watched me hurdle several hundred frogs over a hedge. So on this occasion, I probably scared them. I've also come across a naked rambler, his junk just swinging in the breeze. I swear a lot in my car. Was driving to work on a Saturday morning down the interstate. I was in the middle lane and I was glancing in my side mirror and noticed a car catching me quickly. I looked over as it passed me, and in the back of this coupe was a lady banging on the window screaming for help. I sped up to them and she noticed me and started screaming again. I got behind them and followed them and could see him reaching back and hitting her. I called 911, and as I was, he sped off. As I was talking to dispatch, I caught up and he noticed me and realized I was following him. He moved over in front of me and came to a complete stop. At that point, I didn't know if he had a gun or what, so I went around him and exited. Once he went past the overpass, I got back on and followed him, but he eventually lost me as I couldn't keep up. Fortunately, I was on with 911 the entire time and they had cops ready to pull him over. Eventually, they got him to pull over, and when I passed them, he was handcuffed on the ground and she was sitting there. Coming to find out, it was his ex and he abducted her and was taking her who knows where. I followed them for around 30 miles, weaving in and out of traffic and going 100 miles per hour at times to keep up. Definitely creepy thinking of what he was maybe preparing to do to her. This sounds like it might actually be the description of a movie I never saw, but if this is real, that's great to hear. Good on you for doing something and helping save that woman's life, probably. A meteor falling out of the sky. It was like 10:30 at night. In my peripheral vision, I thought maybe it was a single firework because it was bright. I looked up and saw a bright green ball shooting across the sky. I was overcome with fear for a split second, and the thought flashed through my head, I hope I don't die right now from a warhead or a huge meteor strike. It fell across the horizon for what seemed like forever before it appeared to burn up. Turns out it landed a state away. No one got hurt, but it was definitely copper because it was glowing bright green. The 3 cars ahead of me had all pulled over, just as I did when I didn't notice until I pulled back on the road. I was seeing these other people witness what I just had that solidified what had happened to me. It was seen falling from the sky in the surrounding 3 states. This was in the Midwest. It landed in Minnesota. I live in Minnesota and looked this up. Turns out there was something that came into the atmosphere, though I don't think it landed so much as burnt up. But I could be wrong. Looked cool though. I was driving a 2-lane road that runs through my little country town one winter morning at 5 a.m. to get to a radio show I was hosting. I was doing like 60 miles per hour, and all of a sudden I look to my left and see a pale face literally next to me against the glass driver's side window. Was seriously spooked and thought I'd seen a ghost. Looked into the rear view and nothing but darkness. I get to the radio station and couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I decided to look up the local news and saw that a man had been hit by a truck at the same spot literally 2 or 3 minutes after I'd driven by. I quickly realized the face I saw was a man trying to kill himself by hurtling himself across the road in front of my vehicle but didn't quite make it. The next car driving the opposite direction got him. I called CHP and told them my story and asked them to tell the driver so he wouldn't feel as guilty knowing this guy had intentionally killed himself. Dude's truck was totaled and I have no idea if CHP ever relayed my story to the driver. I just finished university for Christmas break, but I couldn't get a ride back until Christmas Eve. My stepdad drove 2 hours to pick me up at 6 a.m. so we could be home for 8 to 9 for a family event. We didn't know we wouldn't make it, of course. The roads were fairly dead, it was winter, so sunlight was scarcely present, but it was just light enough for me to spot something incredibly pale sticking out of a garbage bag on the side of the road. I thought to myself, was that a human effing leg? And my suspicion was soon backed up by my stepdad's. Did you see that? Did that look like a leg to you? As I said, the roads weren't busy at all, what with it being the earliest time of day in known history and Christmas Eve. We actually pulled over and reversed down the motorway just enough to be able to see it. Couldn't make out what it was from where we sat, so my stepdad, who insisted I stay put in case there was a psycho on the loose, got out to take a look. He confirmed it, a mother effing human leg on the side of the road. All kinds of thoughts passed through our mind. Was it an accident? Was there a cannibal 1 drumstick short for Christmas dinner? We called the police, who got to the scene faster than I thought possible and began asking questions. They sent us on our way eventually, and for days afterwards we couldn't find anything in the news about it. It wasn't until a month later that they called my stepdad to follow up and confirm that foul play was ruled out, but that leaves more questions than answers, really. My stepdad thinks a medical waste truck may have had the locks malfunction on its doors based on the appearance of the bag. It was apparently very heavy duty. But I can't imagine how that would go unnoticed. If you're driving the medical waste truck and you lose some of the waste, you probably didn't take an inventory. Say, Barry, it looks to me like we're 1 leg short. Well, crap, 3rd time this month. I was in high school. I was with 2 other friends driving out in the middle of nowhere, rural roads like nothing but cornfields for miles at a time with a farmhouse every once in a while. It was late at night, perfect for teenage kids to be out doing crap they weren't supposed to be doing, drinking and smoking weed. All of a sudden, bright lights a ways behind us. We are all thinking it's a sheriff's deputy's car and that we are totally effed. Within a couple of seconds, the lights are right on us, so bright that the entire inside of the car is so saturated with light that we can all clearly see each other's bewildered faces. And as suddenly as the light is upon us, it's gone. Pitch black as it was mere seconds before. No sounds, no light in the distance, just darkness. To this day, I have no idea what it was that happened. It was about 25 years ago, and I can picture the moment so vividly in my head. I still run into one of those guys I was with every once in a while when I visit my hometown, and we always reminisce about it, while our wives laugh at our crazy stoner story. One summer night when I first met my husband, we decided to drive to Charleston, South Carolina to visit my sister. That part of South Carolina is still very old world and haunted feeling. The trees are draped with Spanish moss, and it is hot and humid and bug infested. The whole scene was straight out of Scooby-Doo. As the sun started to go down, it began cooling off, so we started waking up. My car had no AC and we were overheated and silent. It was rapidly getting dark when I realized there were no streetlights. No streetlights, and we hadn't passed a gas station in a very long time. We weren't encountering other drivers anymore. I asked my husband if he wanted to drive, and he said yeah. That part of South Carolina is flat. The roads are straight, and there are fields and trees and swamps on either side. Far ahead, I could see a light, maybe a street light or some kind. I planned on pulling over there to change places. I started slowing down as we got closer. We'd been approaching it for a really long time when I saw that the light was moving. Flames. It was a car, engulfed in flames in the middle of nowhere, burning on the side of the road with no one around. I was so bewildered by what I saw, I'd taken my foot off the gas, coasting as we approached. My future husband said, "Go, go!" and I put my foot down. He then told me there were a couple of people standing there in the line of trees. They were hunkered down at first, but when I slowed down, they stood up. This was before cell phones. We just fled. There was no mention of anything about it on the radio or in the paper the next few days. I've heard stories about people who set up fake accidents like this to rob people or worse. Good thing you two got out of there and didn't stop. In the small southern town I grew up in, there's a highway that is almost never used. It always seemed like a huge waste of resources because although a large 4-lane highway, it doesn't really connect to any two major destinations, but it does lead into the city of the major state university a couple hours away. My dad told me the only reason they built it was because some alumni pushed for its construction so that people had an alternate route to get to the university during football season so they could drink on the way there. Anyways, my girlfriend and I were driving on this highway one night where it is a rare occurrence to see another car outside of game days in the fall, and there's a guy standing in the middle of the road. There aren't any lights on the road, it's completely dark, and we almost hit this guy that's staring blankly ahead as we nearly hit him. He never flinched, just kept staring past our vehicle, pale as a ghost, wearing all black and no shoes. My immediate thought after we avoid killing this dude is, oh crap, he's a M-head that's wandered out of the woods somewhere. But he was fairly young and didn't have the look of someone strung out. He never looked at us, just kept staring into the distance. I rolled down the window to ask him if he was all right, and he snapped to and walked to the side of our car. He said he had been in an accident and kind of stammered out a story. He was definitely in shock, but things weren't adding up. He was saying he rolled his car, but there was no car around. There are rows of pine trees on both sides of the road, so his car couldn't have rolled very far. He wasn't aggressive in any way, and he didn't seem intoxicated outside of having a far-off stare. And the strangest part of the entire encounter was the way he asked for a ride. He wasn't like, "Hey man, my car is effed and I don't have a phone. Can you give me a lift to my house?" He kept saying over and over, "Will you please invite me into your vehicle?" He seemed stranded, and I didn't want to just leave this young guy who, besides being shoeless in the middle of an empty highway wearing all black, seemed like a fairly clean dude, but I had this knot in my stomach. I was about to drive him to the closest gas station when I, probably just recovering from the adrenaline dump of having nearly run over someone, noticed he had no wounds or blood on him. I told him we didn't have phones and to wait by the side of the road while we drove to the convenience store to call police, and drove off. In the rear view, he just stood there watching us drive away, sort of how we rode up on him. As soon as we rode off, my girlfriend said she thought he might have been a vampire. LOL, we saw no wrecked car on the remaining stretch of highway, and the police never caught up with him to see what his deal was. But it was freaky as crap. If you are reading this vampire man, wear shoes to make yourself more believable next time. I had spent the day with friends in the closest big city. It was about 45 minutes drive to get back to the town I lived in. I headed out at around 1:30 a.m. Highways were pretty dead, no traffic at all really, so I'm just cruising along, looking forward to getting home and going to bed. A fog rolls in. That's not terribly unusual for a humid night in the Midwest. I thought, ooh, fog, creepy. But mostly it was just a quiet drive. Except that it seemed to go on forever. I was waiting and waiting and waiting for this one particular exit that is halfway between the city and my town, but it just wasn't happening. I finally looked at the clock, and it was 4 o'clock in the morning. I had left my friend's house 2.5 hours earlier, and no, I hadn't been drinking or doing drugs or anything. Time just disappeared. Right when I started to work myself into a real frenzy, wondering if I'd slipped into some kind of time wormhole and was doomed to drive this empty, foggy highway forever, the exit to my town appeared. I went home, went right to bed. 3 hours after leaving my friend's house. What the F? I checked all the clocks in the house when I got home just in case the clock in my car was just broken somehow, but they all confirmed that the 45-minute drive had taken more than 3 times as long. Woke up the next day, life continued as normal. I still have no explanation for those lost hours. I had a friend tell me a story like this once. He was all convinced he had lost time after leaving a friend's house at 10 p.m. I then was like, so your friend said you left at 10 too? And the guy was like, no, he said he knows I left at midnight, but I'm pretty sure it was 10. One night my wife and I couldn't get our 3-year-old and 1-year-old to go to sleep. They were driving us both a little crazy with constant crying, and none of our usual strategies were working, and it was making us aggravated at each other. I suggested an evening drive to settle everyone down, and my wife was more than relieved at the idea. We quickly packed up the kids and headed out. The idea was to take a typically quiet country highway for a few miles to the interstate, drive about 10 to 12 miles west, turn around and come home. The stretch of this country highway is particularly lacking in streetlights, especially considering it's located in the busy suburbs of New York City. We just left the local road leading to the county highway and gotten up to speed, which was about 50 miles per hour, when I spotted something in the road ahead. The stretch of highway is frequently crossed by deer, and it's not uncommon for freshly struck carcasses to be littered at its shoulders. By the time I alerted my wife that there was something in the road, we were passing it, and it definitely wasn't a deer. We were traveling in the middle lane on a dark highway doing 50 miles per hour, and a person was crossing the fast lane into the path of our car. I don't think my wife and I would have been so chilled by someone crossing this section of road had it not been for the rest of the circumstances. First, as I mentioned earlier, we were already a little rattled at each other with the kids not complying with their usual bedtime routine. Next, while my wife was glad to get out of the house on this particular night, nap rides had become a thing of the past since our second child was born. Not only was it twice the work to pack and unpack the kids in and out of the car, but we also had twice the precious cargo to keep safe. It just didn't seem worth the trouble and risk 99% of the time. This was an exception. Perhaps the thing that took us both the deepest out on that dark section of highway was that there were absolutely no cars in front or behind us. This person didn't have to cross at that time. They could have crossed with zero risk either 10 seconds earlier or later of us passing by. Finally, I thought the person was holding a big stick or bat. My wife didn't see this, but she also was not the first to spot the person. This stick was what tipped the scales and triggered us to call 911. The 911 operator didn't initially think the call deserved a police response. No one had been hurt, and she said people cross the highway there on foot all the time. It wasn't until I mentioned that I thought the person had a stick that the operator said she was dispatching someone to check it out. We hung up, relieved that perhaps we'd help prevent someone who was either crazy or intoxicated not hurt someone else or themselves. What we didn't know this whole time was that our 3-year-old was aware of everything that was happening. He'd not fallen asleep yet and heard us call 911 and specifically mentioned that a person was in the road. I suspect that he detected we were alarmed, and when we told him it was a deer in the road that we called the police about, he said, "But I heard you say a person, not a deer." We felt bad for lying to him, but at the time it seemed like the right thing to do was persist it had been a deer and encourage him to go to sleep. We continued on towards the interstate, quietly talking about the circumstances that led us to call the cops, convincing each other it was the right thing to do. Both kids were sound asleep by the time we made it to the juncture where I'd planned to turn around. I don't usually take the same way back home from places, just for a change of scenery, and this is what I planned to do on this night. As we took the eastbound service road towards the alternate route home, traffic came to a stop because of a car accident ahead. There was still an opportunity to take the same interstate back, so I took it, somewhat relieved that we could pass the same spot where the person was in the road, maybe getting closure that nothing bad had happened. We were only on that same dark county highway heading towards home for a few minutes when I saw the flashing lights against the trees lining the highway. They were still mostly hidden around a big bend in the road ahead. I slowed down, my heart sinking with my wife's, the both of us already knowing what had happened. We were the first car to be stopped on the highway, in full view of the blanket covering the body in the eastbound fast lane. It was only about 15 yards away. One cop car was near the body and another was back further, parked across the middle and slow lanes. One shoe could be seen in the middle lane close to the body. The other could be seen 30 yards down the highway, near the shoulder. Between the shoes were small broken car parts littering the road. Down further were 2 cars stopped on the shoulder with their flashers on. As the cop whose car was closest to the body approached our car, I heard stirring in the back seat. Oh no, I thought. Thankfully, just as our 3-year-old popped his head up and asked what was going on, an ambulance pulled behind the cop and blocked the view of the body from our child. Before the cop could say anything, we told him what we'd seen right at the spot only 15 minutes before while heading in the opposite direction. We told him we were the ones who'd called 911 while out on our nap ride, and he told us to stay where we were so he could get our info. While we waited for the cop to come back to us, the cars had started to stack 5 to 6 deep behind us. We watched our opportunity disappear to be granted a quick K-turn and exit off the highway at the entrance not far back, which some drivers had already started to use as an exit. 3 hours later, we made that K-turn on the closed highway, exited the entrance, and went home. The first 15 minutes of that time was spent lying to our 3-year-old that deer who'd been hurt on the highway needed ambulances too. He wasn't buying it, but finally he fell back asleep. In the days that followed, both my wife and I were sad and reflective about the situation. We talked about it a lot. We hugged each other and cried. We told family and friends about it in as much detail as possible as part of an unconscious therapy process. Having to rehash everything to an investigator a week later only extended the sadness, but we got closure when the detective called us back at the second week. He said that he was passing on a message from the family of the man who'd been struck and killed, thanking us for providing a description of what happened to their dad in the last moments of his life. The way the detective described it didn't make complete sense to them, it seemed, but they were grateful to us nonetheless. It's sad to hear about the man being hit, but at least it's good that it wasn't you. I can't imagine what that would do to an impressionable 3-year-old mind. At least you called and attempted to get the guy help. Years ago, me and 3 friends were driving home from a weekend trip to another city. It's a 9-hour drive, and we were halfway through, having left around 7 p.m., so it would have been, say, midnight or a bit before, and we stopped at a petrol station in the middle of nowhere. At the petrol station, there was a skinny girl with long hair loitering around. She would have been about 25, I guess, with a large backpack and a raincoat. We didn't pay much attention, so we get our petrol, get pies and stuff like that, get back in the car and find she's sitting in the back seat and has put her backpack in there. Okay, now I can't remember the conversation because it was around 30 years ago, but I know she said she was going to the same city as us, so we let her hitchhike along with us because we're nice guys and a bit stoned. And we figured, what's the harm? Put her backpack in the boot and continued on. So anyway, the thing about this girl, the 3 of us had been away on a weekend where we partied, slept on people's floors, drank a lot, smoked a lot of weed, and hadn't had showers. And we were driving around in a beaten up old car, but still, we could smell her over all that. She didn't smell good, and she talked, or rather mainly monologued, about God and heaven. In detail. What it was like, what you do there, about the physical aspects of it, and so on. It was awkward. In retrospect, a young woman who gets in a beat-up old Ford in the middle of the night with 3 scruffy-looking men she's never seen and smells and talks about heaven probably has a mental health problem. But anyway, here's the thing. The 3 of us had been taking turns driving, and with about an hour left to go, I was asleep in the back next to the girl. The car owner was in the passenger seat asleep, and the driver, unfortunately, he was asleep too. The car veered off the road, and we went onto the gravel shoulder and were heading towards the drainage ditch. So it was a very good thing the girl was still awake and alert because she screamed loudly, and at that point all 3 of us woke up. My friend realized he was drifting into the ditch, corrected, and we continued on, all a bit freaked out and wide-eyed. Dropped her at the ferry, if I recall correctly, so the unusual girl in all likelihood saved us from a car crash. Very strange how things work out sometimes. I was driving from Oregon to California with my young daughter to visit family over a long holiday weekend. We messed around and ended up driving the last stretch really late at night. It was a dark, moonless night and the road was completely deserted. I turned on my high beams to see the road better and traveled with them on for quite some time before I came upon the first vehicle in miles, an old beat-up pickup truck traveling in front of me. I was tired, so it did take me a couple minutes to remember that I had my high beams on still, and I quickly turned them off feeling bad, even though it had only been a couple minutes and there was still quite a bit of distance between our vehicles. After a few minutes, the pickup pulled off the side of the road, and as I passed it, I noticed what appeared to be a lone male driver. As soon as I passed him, he immediately pulled up behind me and got right on my bumper and turned on his high beams. At that point, I was not too worried yet. I figured the jerk would show me, have his little revenge, and then go around me and flip me off. But that is not what happened. Mile after terrifying mile, he stayed right on my bumper with his high beams blinding me. We were on a long, dark section of road miles from the nearest town, and I had no cell service. My daughter had woken up from the high beams lighting up the car and started to cry just as we were entering a treacherous stretch of narrow 2-lane road with sharp curves and steep cliffs. I hoped he would realize at this point that this was now a very dangerous thing to continue, but he did not let up at all. I was scared out of my mind and felt trapped. There was no way I could pull over out there on that deserted road, and no way I could lose him on that dark winding road with my daughter in the car. I was white-knuckling the steering wheel, terrified that any minute he was going to try to force me off the road or I was going to miss a corner and crash. Finally, after about an hour of this, we came to the first small town. It was only another 30 minutes to my destination, but I did not want this guy to follow me to our hotel, so I exited, and he exited right behind me. He turned off his high beam, so I thought maybe this was his destination. I took some turns to appear that I knew where I was going, and I thought I lost him, so I headed back to the highway. And then, as I glanced in my rear view, there he was right behind me on the on-ramp, and he raced back up to my bumper and flipped on his high beams. At this point, my heart was pounding so hard, and I really started to think that maybe this guy's intentions were to hurt us, and I was desperately trying to recall where the police station was in my hometown so I could drive there if necessary. Then I realized with great relief that I finally had cell service, so I held my lit-up phone in the air, hoping he would see it and get the message loud and clear, and then I slowed down and called 911. The road-raging psychopath immediately took the next exit off the highway, only one exit before my hotel. I was a mess at that point, barely able to explain the situation to the 911 operator, who kindly offered to send someone to look for him. I didn't have a plate or even a definite vehicle color, so I declined, but said I would call back if I saw him again. When I got out of the car, I was shaking so bad I could barely walk. Definitely one of the scariest things to ever happen to me. That sounds like a nightmare. That was strangely generous of you to flash your phone screen at him, but I suppose you also wanted to get him to go as soon as possible and not wait for the police to find you driving. Still, I hope that guy hasn't hurt anyone else. I always remember having a call to attend a street to deal with a rabbit that was roaming around the streets causing issues in a residential street. My partner and I laughed our heads off. It was a slow night and we had never heard a job like it in our lives, so we made our way after speaking to dispatch. We pulled up to the area where we saw this white glowing thing moving at an incredibly fast speed towards us about an inch off the ground. Well, that was it, we thought, our mythical white rabbit. We made our way and then realized it was off the ground and hovering on the road. No, wait, flying towards us. Bang! It had hit our car. It was a barn owl that basically kamikazed onto our bonnet. We got out, one dead/dying owl. Freak of nature, we thought. We moved it to the side of the road and cracked on. We headed to the street in question, and after 5 minutes, we saw it. Yep, we saw a rabbit running around, just charging around. It was so weird. It was a pet one, so quite large. Left, right, twisting. It was odd. Residents are looking at their downstairs windows. We live in the UK, so rabies is non-existent, and managed to capture it and throw it into our boot using a traffic jacket. As we drove off, we heard another call about a muntjac deer that was headbutting an iron gate and had its head stuck, which the RSPCA Animal Welfare Team were heading to nearby. Late that night, about 20 minutes, a dog attacked its owner. It was becoming weird, a rabbit running around, a self-destructive owl, deer going crazy, and dogs all within an hour. We had no idea what was happening, but something was causing those animals to go crazy in that area. Nothing else happened, but that was weird, and it just stopped. One time I was driving home from work. I was still getting used to this new neighborhood I'd moved to, so I turned down a different street each day just to explore the area. Anyway, this day I decided to take a road I hadn't taken before. Ahead of me on the road, I saw what looked like a big cardboard box, and I was contemplating stopping and moving it out of the road. As I get closer, I realize it's not a box, but a naked man crouched on the road. He wasn't moving at all, just crouched there. I was trying to decide what to do. Do I drive past, stop and ask if he needs help, call 911? When all of a sudden he jumps up, fully exposed, and there is blood all over his crotch. He starts running towards my car, so I zoom around him, park up the block a bit, and watch what happens next. The naked bloody dude throws himself on the hood of the car that was behind me. I see some kids playing basketball down the road and wave them over, ask them if they saw anything, and they tell me the man had chased them with a knife before taking the knife to his own D. They tell me they already called 911 and police are on their way, so of course I stick around and watch what happens. Man ends up stumbling from the car, he sprawled his naked butt on, and nearly passes out in a nearby yard. Ambulance struggles to get him to cooperate, but they finally haul him off to the hospital. I never found out what happened to him or why he decided to cut his genitals off. Definitely the weirdest thing I've ever come across while driving. Still sort of shocks me to this day. Here I was about to make some kind of Metal Gear Solid joke about the box and clothes glitching off of Solid Snake, but that took a bit of a dark twist. Glad the guy at least survived to get help from the ambulance. This is the first time telling this story to anyone other than close friends. Also didn't take place on a highway, but want to tell it anyway. One night my former best friend and I were driving around smoking weed on the back roads around our town in rural Mississippi. We love driving around and just exploring all the strange crap you can see out here. So we were on the road that we used to get onto the real back roads, but this time we decided to take the only left turn on this road. It's obviously not a well-traveled road, but it's paved, which is more than you can say about many of the roads we drove on. We came to the end of the road with it turning into a dirt road/driveway heading deep into the woods on the left and a driveway leading to a house just off the road to the right, with what looks like a few people standing around a pickup talking. The strange thing is that there is one of those sharp turn yellow arrows on the tree at the fork pointing to the left. I get a bad feeling at this point. I've learned to heed these warnings since then and want to turn around, but she insists we keep going since the sign must mean it's still a road and not a driveway. Hard to tell in these parts sometimes. So against my better judgment, we go down this road. It's pretty claustrophobic with the trees being basically on the edge of the road, so there's no room to turn around. It's pitch black and overall just has a creepy vibe. We keep going for maybe a minute, and it suddenly opens up into what looks like an overgrown dirt lot. It's clearly a dead end, so we go to circle around and head back, and as we swing the car around, the headlights fall on the creepiest old house I've ever seen. There is no security light and no lights on in the house, and no blinds on any of the windows so you can see straight into the house. It looks neglected, but it's not decrepit. All the windows and the door are still intact, but there's no furniture to be seen except for a single mattress leaned against a wall. At this point, my instincts are screaming at me to get the hell out of there, so we do. On our way to the house to the right of the fork has the road illuminated with a bright light that wasn't there before. We don't think much of it and keep driving. We make it about 75 feet down the road when a car pulls out of the yard where the light was coming from and starts driving behind us, and suddenly it shines a spotlight straight into the car. It's from the passenger side, so I know it's not a cop, and trucks with spotlights on them are pretty common around here, mostly used by poachers for night hunting. They start to come up on us fast, and we're pretty scared at this point, so we start to speed up, and the truck does the same until we're going about 60 on this windy butt back road, and it's still gaining on us while blinding us with a spotlight. We get back onto the road we turned off of and start doing about 75. The truck whips up behind us and keeps chasing. It takes about 10 minutes and several turns before we finally lose them. We still refer to it as Spotlight Road. LOL. This one isn't scary or creepy, but I certainly thought it was strange. I was young, rather poor, and I was driving in the middle of nowhere on a straight, flat road about 85 miles per hour. Can't remember where I was going, but if I recall, it was on US 90 in South Texas. My windshield wiper fluid was out, and I was at that age I didn't care about that crap. So as time goes on, I noticed this weird black cloud in the distance moving rather quickly toward the road. I wasn't concerned at first. It was a comfortable day and I had my windows open, but I thought, well, let me roll them up. I might drive through that cloud. As I got closer to it, I was wondering, what the F is this? It really just looked like a black cloud. Instead of in the sky, it was crawling near the surface. I really didn't know what it was and thinking I should stop, but I was really in a rush to get to my destination and thought I'd outrun it anyway. Well, I kept going, and then just as I get to where the black cloud was, I still thought I'd beat it just barely, but I didn't. I crossed the street at the exact time and my windshield got splattered with what immediately appeared to be a massive amount of bees, to such an extent that it almost immediately blocked my view because so many of them splattered on my windshield. I'm not sure if they were killer bees or not at the time, but it caused me to be unable to see except in one small area. Of course, no means to clean the windshield. And I wasn't exactly comfortable just pulling over and cleaning my windshield immediately, so I did the best I could after reducing speed and drive forward a little bit. After driving about 5 more minutes, I got out and ended up taking off my shirt to clean it as best I could until I got to the next town to clean it proper. Thankfully, also having the means to buy a new shirt. I learned how important windshield washer fluid was that day and ruined a shirt. I don't think I've ever had an experience like that again. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.